Thank you for listening to Reverberate. This week, we're talking about control, anxiety, and the kind of wisdom that lasts, even though we cannot guarantee our own outcomes. Ecclesiastes presses us to see our own limits, yet Proverbs teaches us to walk wisely. So, how do we plan, work, teach our children, and pursue good things without turning wisdom into another way to trust ourselves? Let's get into it. So, in your sermons, you made this connection between our desire for control and holding on to control and anxiety and fear. And I guess kind of first off, what do you mean by control and what do you mean by anxiety in that context?
Yeah, that's a great question because Ecclesiastes doesn't use the word control. So I'm pulling a concept from it and trying to take a lot of different ideas, he says, and put them in one word, which is sometimes difficult to do. So if we were going to talk about why I use control in Ecclesiastes, what I mean is, as Solomon starts here, he teaches that we all seek certain big picture things. We seek gain in our life in different ways. That can look like, I want my life to be meaningful. I want my life to have value or worth, or I want to be safe. Those are all big picture goals. I want to achieve that thing because all of us is baked into us as humans. None of us think, I really don't want my life to be meaningful. I want it to be a complete waste. Nobody thinks that way, at least not if you really think about it. Nobody says, oh, I don't want safety in my life. It might look different for different people, but nobody really thinks that way. So we have certain things we seek, and we seek it through various means, which Solomon talks about, like knowledge. I'm going to pursue knowledge so that my life is worthwhile. I know enough that my life is valuable. Or joy or achievement, we say, I'm going to achieve enough to make sure my life is remembered. That's a goal. I want my life to be remembered. The way I'm going to get there is through achievement. Or we might say, I'm going to handle all my relationships so that I guarantee my emotional safety. People do this all the time. You manipulate the way you interact with people because you don't want to be hurt. You put a certain front out and a mask to conceal who you really are because you want to make sure people respond to you the way you want them to, right? So there's a sense in which we're pursuing a certain goal and we use means to do it. If we're doing that in a kind of self-trust, self-reliance that says the ultimate guarantee that I will be safe is me. I'm going to pursue knowledge and I'm going to make sure I'm safe. I'm going to manipulate my relationships and I'm going to make sure I'm safe. Or one of those other gains. I'm going to pursue achievement and I will make sure my life has meaning and purpose and value and all of those things. When I talk about that kind of self-trust, that's what I mean by control. So the opposite of control is, in this case, is trust in God. Trust in self is control. Trust in God is the opposite. So if we think like someone who gets on a roller coaster, you have no control. Like you aren't trusting yourself. And some people are terrified to get on roller coasters for exactly that reason. Some people are scared to death to fly, but they're perfectly happy to drive 90 miles an hour down an interstate. Statistically, that's far more dangerous. Or maybe they drive 70 miles an hour. It doesn't really matter. But statistically, driving that interstate is much more likely to be an accident. Why do we feel more comfortable there? Because we feel, at least at some level, I'm the ultimate controller of my safety. I get in a plane, I better hope the mechanic was good, and I better hope the pilot's good, because I have no control. And some people, because they don't have that I'm the final guarantee of safety here, they're much more nervous. There's other reasons to be afraid of flying too. But that kind of thing describes control. So if you trust yourself to say, I am the final guarantee that my life is going to have meaning or safety or any of those things, that is self-trust, which I'm describing with control. And I would say what we're really doing is putting ourselves in the position of God and saying, I am the one who's going to guarantee my safety. Actually, I struggle to really do that. If I stop and think about it, there are plenty of things that are dangerous that I can't control. So the more I think about it, I get this other response, which I'm calling anxiety, which is where if you're trusting yourself and you realize you can't in fact control all of those things, then you start to feel this kind of, it's like your soul just clenches up and you have fear and worry and you're like, oh, how do I even live? Because I can't make sure my life is full of meaning and purpose. It's really interesting, even in popular culture, sometimes these things are recognized. Like there was the Broadway Hamilton has a phrase in it that says, "You have no control who lives, who dies, and who tells your story." And it's really the message of Ecclesiastes, part of it, is to say, when you take someone in history who became famous, why did they become famous? Because somebody after them told their story, and they didn't have any control over that. Somebody could have stolen all the credit, and that happens in history, and they wouldn't have become famous. To recognize there's so much that we actually can't control. And if you trust yourself to bring those things out, I think this is one of Solomon's points, is if you seek control like that, I'm going to trust myself to make sure I'm the final guarantee my life has meaning, value, or safety. And we could probably expand that list, but at least those three things. If you trust yourself, you will always find anxiety because limited, finite humans don't have that kind of power. So you can, and again, we could translate what I'm saying. You can seek worth for your life. You can have worth seeking control. That means I'm seeking worth by trusting myself to guarantee it. You could have safety seeking control. I'm seeking safety by trusting myself to guarantee it. Emotional safety or physical safety, whatever. And part of Solomon's point, he just over and over hammers, you are in fact not God, which means you cannot guarantee the outcome you want. We don't like that, because we, in fact, would like to be able to guarantee that outcome. But Solomon just keeps pushing us back to say, no, you can't. And the more you try to be God, the more you realize it's not going to work. I can't be God. And your soul feels that as something like anxiety. And we tend to point it somewhere outside of us and say, oh, I'm anxious because of all of these dangers, which there are dangerous things. There are lots of dangerous things. But the question is, am I the final guarantee of my safety? If so, I'm actually nowhere near worried enough, right? And we don't think about it that way. If I'm the one who has to guarantee my soul or my emotional self is truly safe, I'm in trouble because I only have a tiny little slice of knowledge and a tiny little slice of energy. I've got very little to actually guarantee that. If I'm in control of making sure my life is meaningful, I'm probably in way more trouble than I think, because what can I guarantee will happen? Almost nothing. And Solomon is pushing us to that. He's doing what Francis Schaeffer used to do when people would come talk to him at L'Abri in Switzerland. People would come from all over the world, and they would want answers to deep questions, and he would have philosophical conversations with them while eating dinner, and they had a farm there, so while milking goats, while doing all these things, they'd have these deep philosophical conversations. And he described what he would try to do, which is he'd take somebody who's wrestling with, like, what do I believe? Do I believe in Christianity? Should I believe other things? And a lot of times he'd push them to say, if Christianity is not true, if there is no eternity, if none of that's real, then you don't understand how terrible life is. And he'd push them further and further to say, love has no real meaning apart from some kind of eternity. What's the point? Who cares? It's just a little slice of a little person on a little planet, and whatever. None of this matters. And he would push them towards meaninglessness in some ways, to say, if life is only what's under the sun, you aren't despairing enough. And then they would, because God has put eternity in man's heart, because we do have that, we're made in the image of God, they would say, no, I don't think that's right. I can't seem to look at the world that way. And then he'd say, now here's the alternative. And he'd give them the Christian view and say, no, actually, this is far better than you thought it was. And that's somewhat what Solomon's doing. He's saying, if you don't have God, if it's only under the sun, it's far worse than you think. You're not anxious enough. You can't guarantee any of it. But if you do have God, it's a very different conversation. And that's the way he's going about it.
So I find it interesting that Solomon wrote both this book and Proverbs. Because in Proverbs, you have a lot of, you could construe as trying to control, advice of acting a certain way and you'll get this good result. And that feels, in this context of control and anxiety and trusting self and trusting God, that feels almost in conflict. So I guess, how can we tell if we are going through wise planning and wise managing of the resources God's given us versus a selfish grasping for control? And where's that balance?
Yeah, I think it's a really wise question in the way you worded it, because the point isn't so much how do I make sure I do the right thing on the front side, but how do I tell what I am doing? And that's a really great way to word it, because many times we're already making decisions and we have to real time evaluate, like, what am I actually doing right now? It's not that we sit here and we decide, okay, here's how I'm going to go live my entire life. We live step by step, and we're constantly going, how am I doing this? Am I trusting in wisdom, or am I trusting in self? So I think questions help us a lot. What happens in your soul when things don't seem to work out will tell you a lot. If you say, I really am trying to pursue a wise investment, for example, and you say, hey, I've got whatever, $5,000. I want to pursue a wise investment. You do your research, you make your plan, you say, I think this is a good investment. You invest $5,000, and then whatever happens in the world, and that investment goes down to $4,000. If that is crushing to you, and you go, how dare God do this to me? How could it possibly work this way? I did all the work. It was the best investment imaginable. If that's crushing you, you start going, wait a minute. Was I trusting myself to guarantee something, or was I saying this seems like a wise option, I'm going to pursue it? If we're looking at outcomes and determining whether something was wise based on the outcome, that's not going to work. At least the outcome under the sun. So not considering eternity. Take biblical examples. When Daniel gets thrown in the lion's den, that outcome is not the one he wanted. And if in the lion's den, if he were judging based on outcomes, he would say, wait a minute, this doesn't seem like a very wise choice. Maybe I should have just closed my curtains and pretended to not pray. But instead, now we have the whole story there, and we know that the outcome is good, but we're also told other situations where it's not. And you have Stephen being stoned, for example, and you go, was it wise for Stephen to trust Christ and actually testify to what Jesus had done? Absolutely. But if you only looked at the outcome in this life and you judged based on that, you'd be like, no, that wasn't very wise, right? So to say, are you judging whether something is wise based on outcomes or based on something else? If it's outcomes, then I'm really just trying to make sure I get exactly what I want at the end of the day. Another question you can ask is, where do you feel anxiety? Where does your soul just clench up? It has to work out this way, because if it doesn't, what? What's the rest of that sentence? Because if it doesn't, my soul's not safe. Then I'm trusting myself or my circumstances for the safety of my soul instead of God. It's clearly a self-trust issue at that point. Where do you find that kind of anxiety? I think a sports illustration helps too. If you look at a soccer player or a football player, or any sport you want to pick, and you say, some players seem to be afraid to make a mistake. No coach wants that player. Not that they don't work with them, but that's not what they want them to be. They want them to know what they're doing, to be confident, to be decisive. You make mistakes, that's fine. Learn from them, don't make it next time. Keep working. But the player, once they get afraid to make a mistake, then they become hesitant, right? And the same thing in life. We shouldn't be, if we're looking at wise planning, we're not hesitant and afraid, oh, I can't make any mistakes. Okay, what's in front of you? What needs to be stewarded well? What are wise principles? Okay, let's pursue that. So when you have this decision-making paralysis, if when somebody they've got 3 choices and they cannot seem to make the decision when it needs to be made. Now, maybe you don't need to make it right now. That's fine. But you go, this decision's got to be made and I just can't wrestle through it. I would say usually that's evidence not that you care so much about wisdom when you're paralyzed like that, but that you're grasping for control. What you really mean is, I want to know for sure if I do this is going to be the outcome. And instead to say, God's given you certain resources, and it's not complicated. Guidance for the Christian is God gives you his spirit, he gives you his word and prayer, he gives you his people. And you go, if you are interacting with all of those things, you go, God, I want to make sure that I'm following your wise principles. God gives you wisdom, you take what you have, you steward it. If it doesn't work out exactly like you wanted it to, the conclusion isn't, obviously I failed miserably. The conclusion is, I'm not God. I don't know everything. And that's freeing. It should be freeing. The more we feel like bound and stuck and trapped to make sure the outcome, I've got to guarantee this outcome is this way, the more it looks like we're trusting self or control in order to try and accomplish what we want. And I think when you train young people to do this, probably many of us would do this. If you're parents, you would look at your child, you'd say, I have no idea what is going to be the case in your life in 20 years. I don't know for sure what career you're going to be. I don't know for sure if you've got a young child. I don't know if you'll be married. I don't know who you'll marry. I don't know any of that stuff. What we want them to do is make wise decisions according to good, godly, biblical principles. And we have outcomes we want, of course. But we don't sit here and say, I know for certain you make these choices, here's going to be the outcome. Trust yourself, you got it. No, that's not a Christian answer. Wisdom, and when we went through Proverbs, we talked about this. God's given certain patterns in his world. Wisdom is acting according to those patterns. So we know gravity's a real thing, so you don't throw yourself off a tall building. It would be foolish. It'd be foolish because you know this is the pattern in God's world. We can look in Proverbs and say there's patterns like a soft answer turns away wrath. Does that mean that every time somebody speaks softly back to someone who's mad that they stop being mad? No. But it does mean here's a wise pattern. Live your life according to that pattern. That's wise planning. If I were to say, I've got this figured out, every time somebody's mad at me, no matter what I did that was dumb, I'm just going to speak softly, they will instantly stop being angry. I'm in control of my life now. I'm trusting self, and that's going to produce problems because it doesn't work that way. So I think that comparison of what it looks like to seek wisdom and what it looks like to instead say, I'm going to guarantee my outcomes. Those are two very different approaches. And one of them will find anxiety and fear, and one of them can be lived out in trust for God.
So one thought, we're both parents and we are trying to have a son that's growing and getting stronger, and I want to teach him wisdom. And I start to see him find success in things, and that's awesome. And he starts to pursue those things. And you can think of a kid that starts discovering he has a skill in soccer, and he starts really pouring himself into that. So on one hand, I want to guard him from putting so much of his identity into that thing that in 5 years, 6 years down the road, when he's graduating and then that comes to an end, he's having a crisis. But I also don't want to deflate his energy and his enthusiasm. So I guess maybe to distill this down into a way a sixth grader could understand it, how would you advise a sixth grader who's growing, pursuing something, finding success in it, to keep going, but also not put his identity in that?
Sure. That's a great question. I think in my experience, I remember when I was getting my master's in French horn performance, and I remember somebody told me then, which isn't a sixth grader for sure, but it was helpful to think it through this way. I went to an audition, I played pretty well, I didn't win the job. And I remember somebody telling me, when you go to an audition, you're prepared, you've practiced, you do it well, and 25 other people do the same thing. And only one of you is going to win the job. And their point was, you can do all the good stuff leading up to it. You can prep all the stuff, and yet you're not in control of the outcome, ultimately. And a lot of times that gets worded. People say things like, enjoy the process, enjoy the journey, which is true. It's good advice. Solomon would agree with a fair amount of that kind of advice. To tell that person, if they're really great at math, for example, and you go, oh, you're going to study math. Good. God made math. God loves that your brain works that way. He's teaching you. Keep pursuing it. Keep learning. Will you work in a field that includes a lot of math? I don't know. I really don't. That's okay, though. Enjoy. God's given you math right now. He's given you this gift. Enjoy it. Get better at it. Hard work is good. God rewards diligent hard work. All those principles. But to say that the outcome here is not guaranteed. Sometimes that feels so bad to us because we live in a Disney-fied world of you can do anything you want. So no, actually, you can't. You can do a lot of things, and you can pursue a lot of wonderful things. But you really can't do anything you want. And if you decide, I want to go be whatever, I want to go be the new CEO of Amazon, maybe one person can, but everybody can't, right? So there's just this limitation. We are more limited as humans than we want to admit. So to teach our kids, God's given you good things, pursue them. Where did they come from? Came from God. He's given you the brain that can do math. He's given you the brain that can plan ahead and say, here's what I want to try and study. Good. Trust God and pursue it. As Solomon says, enjoy God and do good. Enjoy God and do good. Pursue math. And maybe you get a few years down the road and you decide that's really not where I need to be. Then enjoy God and do good somewhere else. That's okay. Whereas if you put your identity in it, a lot of times what that really means is you started to look to it for control. So my life is going to have meaning because I'm this amazing mathematician. What happens if it's taken away? Like you said, what happens if you get through high school and you say, I was a great basketball player in high school, but I can't play on a college level? And your identity is stripped away. That identity is the thing you look to say, I'm trusting this is going to bring this result. It's control, ultimately, is all tied into that same thing. So I think we teach our kids to say, God's given you good gifts for now and for today and for tomorrow, and you pursue them and you enjoy them and you do good with them and you trust God to direct all of those outcomes.
Again, as a parent, and we have a school here, so we talk a lot about teaching children wisdom and teaching teens wisdom. I guess to teachers and parents, how can we teach children wisdom without implying that wisdom guarantees the outcome that they want?
I think the first thing, which sounds simple, is read the Bible, because there's so many situations in Scripture where somebody did pursue something wise, and at least initially it did not look like the outcome was what they wanted. And that happened over and over and over and over. It happens with Jesus. He goes to the cross, and it was what he wanted in one sense, but there was a part of him in the garden that goes, no, I don't want this. If this possible, let this pass from me, but not my will, but yours be done. Was Jesus wise in going to the cross? Of course. But was the outcome immediately what he wanted? Was the outcome in this physical life what he wanted? Not in one sense. And you could do the same thing. You could talk about the children of Israel, and you could talk about the way that they pursued godliness or didn't at different times. Obviously, you had both sides. You could talk about Job and say, look at the way he's pursuing wisdom. And God even says there's none righteous like Job. And the outcome at first in his life isn't what he wanted. We see this over and over again, situations where people in Scripture were following God, and yet at least the immediate outcome was not what they wanted. You have Moses, who grows up in Egypt for 40 years, and then there's the whole situation. He kills the Egyptians, and then he was doing that because he loved the people of God and he wanted to protect them, and now he's 40 years off in the wilderness somewhere being a shepherd. And for 40 whole years, he's sitting here going, this isn't the outcome I wanted, right? But it was still, he was pursuing wisdom in that time. You go through all of these different things in the Bible, and what you don't see is that in this life, pursuing wise things always produces the outcome that person would have wanted right then. We don't see that. Instead, we see opposite. And we get things like Hebrews, if you talk about Hebrews 11, and you get the faith chapter, which talks about Moses, and it talks about Abraham, and you get some of the opposite, and you go, Abraham decides he's going to go pursue, Hebrews says, a city built not with human hands. If you stayed put and built a city, maybe that'd be better off. Maybe that would produce the outcome. And no, he steps out and follows God. Seems like the foolish choice, but actually it's the wise choice, even though he wanders and he doesn't come to the promised land immediately. There's all these different things. You get to the end of that chapter, and it says that there were some who trusted God, who lived obviously a wise life, and yet they found death here in this life because of their testimony for Christ. So the more you soak in the scriptural storyline, you realize, yes, God blesses wisdom. Yes, God gives wisdom. Yes, God guides and gives good things. And yet there are times the outcome, at least immediately, and maybe even in this whole earthly life, isn't what you would have chosen. Take Paul. He's shipwrecked and beaten and stoned and all of these different things. Was that the outcome he would have chosen if he were just picking? Probably not. Was he wise? I think Scripture presents him as wise and communicating God's truth. So the more we read Scripture, the more we see these things get separated. I would also say, when we teach kids, even with all of that, when we teach them, here's what is wise, we are probably going to imply that it will guarantee the outcome. It'll be an implied thing. They'll pick it up. We have to also teach them, yes, you pursue these things. It's likely, it is the pattern, that these are better results that come. If you pursue relationships full of forgiveness, you're likely to have better human relationships. Does that guarantee that every human relationship you have is going to be amazing? No. If you pursue wise financial stewardship, does it make it more likely that you're going to have a good financial situation than if you're just foolish and blow your money on everything? Sure. It makes it more likely. It seems like a better option. But that's different from it guarantees this outcome. The New Testament says, don't say we're going to go to such and such a town, buy and sell, gain a profit. We got it. It's all established. Instead, say, if the Lord wills. It's just a recognition that though I have this plan, though I think it's a good plan, though I'm going to pursue this good plan, ultimately, I'm not in charge of guaranteeing that outcome. God is the one who is the final guarantee of anything like that. So, as we teach wisdom, we almost definitely will imply it just by the way we teach children, because they're young and they have to grow in their mental understandings and the way they think and the way their brain works. But we have to also teach the other side that says this is wisdom ultimately. It's not a guarantee of an outcome. One of the ways we could think about that would be when I am pursuing wisdom, often what I really want is omniscience. I really want to have all knowledge. I want to know everything that's going to happen. I know if I do this and this and this will be the outcome. And instead, it's good for us to say, no, what I want to do is know what is wise, what is honoring to God, what fits with his patterns now, and I'm not in control of the outcomes, ultimately.
Yeah, I guess my main takeaway from that is be intentional about teaching the other side of wisdom, because we often teach the Proverbs style, do this, but then don't be afraid to also teach Ecclesiastes.
That's right. There's a reason that the wisdom literature in the Old Testament includes Proverbs and Job and Ecclesiastes. Proverbs is basically the reasoned wise life. This is the way that makes sense. This happens, this results. Great, good. Job says, actually, sometimes it doesn't work out that way. And Ecclesiastes basically says, all of it's fleeting and can't give you all that you want anyway. And we need all of those. We don't need just one.
Thank you again for listening. Ecclesiastes reminds us that we are not God, and that is actually freeing. We can receive wisdom, steward what God has given to us, and trust him with the parts that we cannot control. Next time, we talk about how even good things are fleeting. Achievement, pleasure, and even our pursuit of wisdom are all called vanity in Ecclesiastes. So, should we pursue those things at all? We'll also talk about how to take in the wisdom of Ecclesiastes without falling into depression or a feeling of meaninglessness. We hope you'll listen in.